The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the podcast belong solely to the hosts and not the host's past, present, or future employers. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's Brian for Breaking Down Security. It's just going to be me this week. Miss Berlin is seeing her son off to the Marine Corps. He's going to be enjoying the SUC and Marine Corps Station Paris Island for the next conceivable amount of time. And when she told me it was happening this weekend, I was like, yeah, you're not going to be any kind of frame of mind to do a podcast, because I remember what it was like when I went to boot camp. And so giving her the week off. And Mr. Betcher is busy with family, so I told him to go ahead and do that, because family is first always here at Breaking Down Security, and that's how we roll around here. So let me see. So going to just go ahead and go into our interview this week. This one's been a long time in coming, which I'm actually happy we're going to be doing this one, because it's something that goes beyond incident response. It goes beyond breaches and what have you, to kind of what you do before you get to that point and some of the methodologies. So I'm going to introduce James Nelson, and he can tell you a little bit about himself. And welcome, James, to the show.
Well, thank you, Brian, for having me on.
Sure.
It's super exciting, and hello to all of your listeners. I am really excited for this opportunity to speak with you. I'm currently Vice President of Information Security at Illumio, and started in January, just before sort of the world changed, right? It's been exciting times, but I think it's an exciting time for security, and, talking and looking at how security can provide some value to the conversation and not really just be one of investment, and insurance.
Okay, excellent. So in interviewing for this, I found a lot of very interesting information. What we're going to talk about this week is something called cyber-resilience. And the first thing I did was I Googled it. And of course, Wikipedia comes up, and their definition is it refers to an entity's ability to continuously deliver the intended outcome despite adverse cyber events. Now, you mentioned COVID, but there's a number of things that could happen. We could have geopolitical unrest, like we saw in Hong Kong, that could disrupt operations. We could have, even the Black Lives Matter protests that are happening can also disrupt businesses or organizations. So do you have a different definition, or is the one that Wikipedia gave us that's what you would consider the definition of cyber resilience?
Yeah, I think that this assume breach kind of mental mindset of cyber resilience is another way of looking at it. I like taking even a little bit different approach, though, and I like to think of it as assume that some or all of your controls are going to fail, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because when controls fail, they can let you know that they fail, and you can respond quickly and work to repair them. One, I think, apt analogy is also the human immune system, right? So our bodies are able to deal with pathogens, and whether it be bacteria or viruses that attack us on a daily basis. And for the most part, we kind of just shake it off. But sometimes we might get a cut, or we might get a cold, or we might get some sort of stomach illness, and our bodies let us know what's going on. But then they repair themselves, and they repair the damage. And sometimes we even adapt. We create antibodies for viruses, and that helps us, prevent further infection. So I think, resilience is a great term, and I think there's a lot of different angles to why it's a great way of thinking of security in general. And you're right, it goes to not just the bits and bytes and technical controls, but to the people and to the entities that are either intentionally trying to breach those defenses or even inadvertent harm, right?
Right. Yeah. So one of the big things is, we've talked numerous times about the CIS top 20 security controls. And one of the big things that they tell you about is you need to know what's in your environment, whether it be software or hardware. Cyber resilience really is at the heart of this, right? Knowing what you have in your environment, what tools, techniques, and tactics you can use to make that immune response, so to speak, work for you. Maybe you could tell us a little bit and give us an example of how those hardware and software can work together to create that resiliency.
And that's an excellent question. I think there's really two dimensions to understanding what you have in your environment. So definitely one of them is what preventive and detective controls do you have in your environment? What tools and solutions can you use in this effort, right? But I think it starts actually even earlier than that by understanding what is it that you're trying to protect, right? I like to compare it with the peanut butter approach to security. If you use the peanut butter approach to security, you're just trying to spread your investments out across all of your assets and try to protect them equally. And as we all know, security teams have finite resources, finite bandwidth, investment capabilities, and attention span, frankly. And so using more targeted methods and techniques, I think, can be super helpful to make sure that you get the most out of your investment in time and resources. And so that really starts with an understanding of what do you care about, right? If you look at the data that an organization has, all the different data assets, there are going to be certain ones that help drive that business engine more than others. And personally, I feel like a lot of that is linked to what individual departments in the business overall feels like it needs to be able to deliver on its corporate objectives or organizational objectives, right? And doing an analysis like that, figuring out what your crown jewels are, help you focus your efforts. And I think this ties into cyber resilience because to some extent, resilience is about taking in and accommodating harm that you can recover from, but not let something be terminal or existential, right? And to some extent, that means by directing your resources and focusing on protecting those crown jewels, you may not protect your other stuff quite as much. Right. And that disturbs a lot of security folks. And it frankly disturbs a lot of folks at the board and executive level. Like, why aren't we protecting our entire company's assets, right? But at the end of the day, like, how important are HR policies from the standpoint of confidentiality, right? Probably not a huge deal. But for an R&D company, software source code, or for a financials company, the customer data and financial data is super important. And so having an understanding of that, I think, helps you focus your efforts and energy. But to answer your question about, tools and techniques, I think to me, and this is talked a little bit about, this is covered a little bit by some of the discussions you'll see online and in publications about cyber resilience. It's a system-wide, an ecosystem mindset versus something that is in a silo, right? You have to think about this across your environment from a holistic standpoint. And I think systems, security systems and processes that are well integrated laterally with each other have the best chance at providing cyber resilience. If you have siloed tools and siloed processes, they're not going to be able to be those canaries, right? To say, hey, something's gone wrong. There's a failure here. You need to take action. But if you create those integrations and those automations, I think that helps amplify their level of effectiveness.
Right. So if we keep using the immune system analogy, there's when we're talking about resiliency, there's two areas here, right? We're trying to protect before that happens, but we also need to have controls that protect once somebody has gotten in to help reduce damage. Is that correct in what I'm thinking here?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of that comes from layers, right? We talk about defense in depth. We talk about as cybersecurity discipline about layered defenses. And I think that is super important, because if you're going to assume some of those controls fail, they can't be the last controls before your crown jewels, right? You have to have something else that's there. And so even if you have some processes and some controls that end up being the canaries in the coal mine, you got to have additional layers. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not one layer deep. It needs to be deeper than that. And you need to be able to defend in a progressively stronger and more robust manner as the attackers get closer to the target, right?
So let's go back. We talked about the board and what they consider to be the crown jewels. Depending on how large the organization is, different value is placed on different things, and the board may want something protected that the IT department may feel is not as valuable as this other thing, and specific, say the DevOps team has a completely different idea of what the crown jewels are. How do we make the delineation of what really is valuable here? Is there a methodology, or is there some kind of rules of the road here where we can go, yes, actually source code is really the biggest thing instead of customer confidence or the AWS environment?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I struggle with that quite a bit. Some years back, because there are individuals, stakeholders that will see the value of security and maybe even amplify it past the value of the specific data that really needs to be protected. But then the custodians of data that really truly are the crown jewels may feel a little bit too laissez-faire about how it's handled. So what I found helpful is, we all in the industry are familiar with the compliance burden, the obligations that we have to protect certain types of data, whether it be because of GDPR for regulatory reasons, or customer contract requirements, or maybe even certifications. But I think there's another dimension of this, which is this value that we've been talking about. And how I like to think of it is in terms of a conversation I might have with a stakeholder, with a business partner. So if you imagine, sitting down and talking with, somebody in the finance department, you might ask them, hey, so what objectives do you have for the coming quarter? And they might say, one of those objectives is, managing the budget. Okay, so in order to manage the budget, what kind of data do you need? Well, we need to have, X, Y, and Z. And one of those is, let's say, revenue numbers from sales. And okay, so what happens if those revenue numbers are not available? And the response probably is going to be pretty visceral. Like, we can't make a budget without revenue numbers, right? It's just not possible to land the budget. Oh, okay, what if those are inaccurate in some way? Like, well, kind of depends, but that can get us into trouble, right? We might overspend or underspend or what have you. And then obviously confidentiality is super important, because if that information is breached somehow and publicized, especially if you're a public company, like, that can have huge ramifications. And so what you've just asked is, how important is the availability, integrity, and confidentiality of this data? And it's a great opportunity to establish the value of protecting that data in order to serve the needs of the business, in order to support their success, right? So it helps you build that investment sort of partnership. Now, if you think about it holistically, I just talked about it from the standpoint of like one objective and one department and so forth. But what if you took this same approach across the entire company and you rationalized all that information to where you found certain data sets in the company that simply provided more value to the business engine, and that you could align and agree on as an organization, as executive stakeholders, as the board, like, this really is our crown jewels. So that's the approach that I've taken. I found it helpful for two reasons. One is it's somewhat quantitative, right? It's not overly quantitative, but it's not a math problem, but it is something that can be supported with data. And it is also an easy way to connect to that investment story that you want to have with your stakeholders, so that you're not seen as insurance. You're not seen as just, let's spend the minimum on security. Like, that department, that finance department, invests in protecting their data. They're investing in their own success, and they're investing in you, right?
Right. So that kind of data would be, you'd almost have to gauge it by the impact of damage to the company. So source code loss, yeah, that's bad. Customer records, very bad. So that would be like your crown jewels. If you're keeping customer records, you're keeping credit card information. Hopefully you're not keeping credit card information, but if you're keeping that kind of stuff, if you're not hashing your passwords and somebody dumps the database, that would be more bad than the source code, because you can always make more product. I mean, that's oversimplistic, but you would have to actually sit down and have some real hard conversations with people, because there's going to be people with skin in the game. It's like, no, mine's the most important, and no, the IT servers are not the most important. IT manager, the source code on them is more important. So I see that being a lot of hard conversations in many cases.
Absolutely. And there's another aspect of that, which is what you talked about source code being lost or customer data being lost. Having those conversations about what risks are simply not ones you want to even contemplate, like what is totally unacceptable risks, is an important type of conversation as well to have. Because again, to the resilience story, there are certain things, certain infections, certain injuries that you may be okay with, but existential ones are ones that you definitely want to avoid if at all possible, right?
Right.
And so source code loss may be something that is not existential, but customer trust loss may be one that is, and that you want to focus on that as one of those big ticket items that you address.
Right. Okay. So one of the things you've added here in our show notes, and we have show notes, so there's a lot of extra stuff that's going to be in here. So James, you're day one Infosec CISO at a brand new company, moderately sized. They're not like a startup with 3 people. You say, hey, we need to, set up zero trust for cyber resiliency. And how do you sell that to an organization if they've, 1, never heard of it, or 2, already have something in place that they think is good enough? And am I thinking zero trust in terms of the system itself, or is there a different language here that I'm not thinking about when I think of zero trust? Is it the system created by Google that is used for authentication and accessing systems, or is there another zero trust that I am unaware of?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, an excellent point, because it is a bit of an overloaded term, and there are many different views on what zero trust means, right? So to some extent, there's a zero trust methodology and approach, and there are zero trust products. And all can be true, right? But when I'm, starting in a company from scratch, or I have a small team and there's obviously existing controls in place and so forth, I think the most important thing is to create a common set of terminology and language that we can use. And as an extension of that, make security relatable to the folks that I talk to, right? The other executives in the company, the leadership, the board, my other stakeholders, right? Ultimately, I want to help them make, expert security decisions without being security experts. And a lot of that really happens through this process of making security terminology and concepts relatable to them in their own language, right? And that especially is important with zero trust. And zero trust, a lot of different ways of looking at it, but it really comes down to making sure that that relationship between the consumer and provider of the data is such that it's a trustworthy exchange, right? And for companies with different types of environments and approaches, it can mean different things. I think one challenge of zero trust, especially if you look at like Google's implementation of it, beyond Corp and so forth, is a lot of times people feel like it's a lot to bite off all at once, and it requires just a massive change to the way they do things. You can start small, right? You can identify what your objectives, like why would you want to go down the road of zero trust? Let's articulate that first. And then what's the roadmap of how we can actually get there to achieve those objectives? There's going to be a step 1, right? Start small and start with something that's quantifiably and demonstrably beneficial. that you can show, right? You have to show it with data, because if you just start putting in these invisible controls that maybe add some friction potentially, and people don't see any value, like that's going to be a losing proposition all day long.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you got to start with something that has visceral impact, right?
Yep. Yeah, we actually had a couple of the folks on. I just posted a link in the show notes to that, where we talked about zero trust networking back in 2017 when they'd written the book, and it's not something you just flip on in a day. I mean, there's definitely implementation issues, and if your customers, especially if a lot of your employees are working at home and they're having to implement major new technology initiatives, the same timeline that worked when you were in the office no longer works when they're working from home necessarily. So time and effort is important in making sure that it's being done properly and in a certain amount of time. I'm learning that as a PMP candidate when I'm working on that. So we had a couple of news articles talking about assuming breach. How can somebody create cyber resilience? It sounds like cyber resiliency should be part of your business continuity plan, which is, beyond disaster recovery. So we're considering it to be a long-term outage. Should you always be practicing cyber resiliency, or is it just something that should happen when business continuity and disaster recovery comes into effect?
The only way you know that your processes and tools work is if you test them, right? And so I would say definite yes in answer to your question. And the question is just simply how you do that and how often you do that. I think what we found over the past few years, and certainly COVID-19 has, and other sort of geopolitical stressors and so forth have really brought this to the forefront. But security is a process. Cybersecurity is continuously evolving discipline, because the attacks are changing and evolving, and how we respond to them have to evolve and adapt as well. And so I would argue that cyber resilience is a mindset and a way of life more than it is a solution. And if it's a way of life and a mindset, then everything that you do should be done with the goal of supporting the ability to, detect, repair, recover, and improve, and use whichever pieces of the pie, the puzzle that you want to in terms of process language. But at the end of the day, you want to be able to know when something bad is happening, when those processes fail, and be able to have them repair either automatically or in an agile way, improve those controls so that they can work again. And then you want to test that sequence, right? Whether it be through a tabletop exercise or red team exercises, however it is you want to do it. Just make sure that it's not something that you set and forget, because if you set and forget, it's never going to work the way you intended, right? But if you're constantly testing it and using it in anger, so to speak, it's going to evolve and adapt and naturally and be successful for you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So when we're talking about resilience and assume breach, are there some things you should just let happen because they're easier to recover from, or should you? Are there just risks that you should try to do your best to avoid and keep, make the chance of that happening so low that you don't have to worry about having controls on the back end to protect, and to recover from? So, fix it so far on the left in this case, in terms of the timeline, that you don't have to worry about having a compensating control if it were to happen.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess I'm not sure that this is the right impulse, but my impulse is to say no compensating controls. That's worrisome, right? I kind of feel like defense in depth at all stages and in all areas is a good thing. But it's a good question. Like, are there certain risks that simply just like, okay, whatever, that's fine. Maybe we take phishing as an example. We do, like say we as an industry like to do link tests for phishing simulations, right? But at the end of the day, like how risky is it for somebody to click on a link? Like
Right.
certainly what happens at the other end of the link may be a different story, right? But are we okay with that breaking down and phishing messages getting through? Are we more worried about the phishing messages that don't have a link in them and they're an enticement to respond and to have a conversation and to build trust and
Right.
credibility, right? Maybe those are the ones that we really want to spend our time on. So it's an interesting point. I'm not sure I have a very clear idea of like what I would be willing to succumb to from a risk standpoint, but I think there's an opportunity to explore that. Yeah.
Yeah. So your marketing people have been kind enough to give me some questions, which I appreciate because this is some things that I hadn't even thought of along the lines of resiliency. So does a compliance mindset help or hinder resilience?
Yeah, it's a good question. Compliance is good at certain things, right? I mean, it's a necessary and helpful framework to be able to address things that we are familiar with, that we understand. But I wonder if a compliance mindset can be counterproductive to cyber resilience if you don't take into account that agile response and repair process and approach, right? Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because Agile's a bit speedier and has kind of left a lot of compliance in the dust.
Yeah. And it's kind of like the OODA loop, right? I mean, so this observe, orient, decide, act. I mean, originally it was for fighter pilots, but we use it now a lot in security and in defense. And it's predicated on this notion that if you can complete the cycle of, observing, orienting to the threat, deciding what you're going to do, and then acting, like if you can complete that faster than your adversary, then you can be successful. And I think that speaks to the agile point, right, that you mentioned, like being able to act more quickly. If you can act more quickly than your adversary, that will give you the success you need, even if they're already potentially behind your defenses, right?
Right. And I have worked with a number of compliance people, some good, some not good. It really depends on how if they treat the compliance frameworks as black and white versus something as guidelines. Some things are hard and fast. You must have passwords. You must have certain things, but there's others that there's a fuzzy area. And it seems like in some cases that compliance hurts resiliency because they ask for things that don't contribute to to being resilient in the organization. Do you have any experience with that? Any kind of stories that you could tell us that about how compliance failed in that respect?
I'll say all the compliance folks that I know are totally on board with the agile approach now. So I don't get an earful when I get back to work tomorrow. But
Yep.
no, I absolutely. I think there definitely is this potential pitfall of looking at things as checkboxes, right? So, and I think a few weeks ago you had a conversation with Masha Sadova about training, right? And so.
Right.
Part of it was, okay, so what is the end goal of your training? Is it to check the box in order to make sure that you have compliance, or are you trying to train, create behaviors? And I definitely had struggles with, executive stakeholders in the past where they felt that, checking the box was important and finding a way to help them understand the benefit of looking at it not just from a checkbox standpoint, but from an process improvement, and looking at it from the standpoint of the real world and the people that are involved is really very helpful. There are some things you just need to check the box on, right? Like I would argue that checking the box on encrypting the disks on all of your laptops, like that's a no-brainer, right?
That's right.
By what specific method you use to encrypt the data, what algorithm, what ciphers, like all that should not necessarily be a checkbox, right? That can be a much more robust conversation about the pros and cons and benefits. Patching your software, should be a no-brainer. But a lot of times there may be compensating controls that you have to look at as well. So, but yeah, at the end of the day, they're definitely I definitely experienced some challenges in helping folks understand that it isn't always just about the checkbox. This is about what the risks are to you, your organization, your data, and how you can create a holistic approach to making things better rather than just checklist approach.
Yep. Is there a specific degree to which cyber resiliency can be done? Are you a third level cyber resilient company, or there doesn't appear to be any kind of rating. I mean, when we talked with last week with Andrew Shakiar, he was talking about the levels for FIDO compliance. We don't have any way of going, well, you should buy our product because we're level 3 cyber resilient. I know there's a NIST document for it, but I don't believe that they have any kind of criteria that we can measure against. You're either cyber resilient or you're not cyber resilient. I mean, how do we as IT people or information security people or security PMs or whatever, how can we measure that and give the results to the board, to CISO who's wanting to know, well, are we cyber resilient yet? Yes. Is cyber resiliency a measure of how long it takes the attacker to do something? I mean, what do we do? What's our measurements that we need to take?
Yeah, it's a good question. And there's maybe two parts to that. One is, how do you convince your customers and other constituents that you have some level of cyber resilience? And then how do you convince yourself, like your senior leadership and your board, that you have cyber resilience? And so let me talk about the first one. I think from a customer facing or a constituent facing standpoint, you're right. There doesn't seem to be any kind of certification. What I'd love to see is this be included or incorporated somehow into some of the other certifications. Now, some of them are somewhat inflexible, right? But if it's possible to put something like this into a SOC report and incorporate it into the control objectives there, that can help transmit and communicate to consumers of that document, customers typically, that the organization is considering the benefits of cyber resilience and here's how they're going about it, right? I mean, it's no different really than like you do business continuity planning and here's some results from it, what have you.
Right.
From the standpoint of internal constituents and the board and so forth, I think that really just comes down again to showing that you've tested it in multiple ways. We talked about tabletop exercises, getting your executives involved in tabletop exercises so that they feel that pressure and that anxiety of, going through that process. Also, red team exercises, independent ones, especially where you can show that, yeah, the red team got in, like red team always wins, right? I mean, that's kind of the conventional wisdom, but the red team got in, but did they really get to the crown jewels? We had these defenses. Here's the tripwires that went off, and we were able to repair and move quickly. We solved that OODA loop faster than the red team did.
Right.
I think that's powerful data for them to help them understand. Because honestly, the board part of what the board is trying to do is figure out, like, is the security team doing a good job? Are they the right people? And are we protected from these risks? And by going through that process of showing, like, sure, somebody can get in, but we've thought steps ahead and here's how we've addressed that. I think that can really gain you a lot of credibility and trust at the board level and the exec level in terms of what the team is doing.
Okay, excellent. So we've talked about mostly hardware, software, and the data involved. How do humans help in terms of cyber resiliency?
Yeah, so it's there's a lot of pluses and there's some minuses. So on the plus side, humans themselves are resilient. They are, we make the comparison to the immune system for a good reason, because we're excellent examples of how we can adapt and mental and psychological aspects of that as well. The flip side is that we're not computers. And so we can't necessarily be relied upon to do things consistently. So I think that also speaks to defense in depth. When you talk about, let's talk about, typical kind of phishing, business email compromise. That's successful oftentimes because you don't have multiple layers in terms of an approval chain. If some attacker says, "Hey, I want you to ship me some money or get me some gift cards," like there needs to be another step in that process, and that kind of helps make sure that even if the person fails in that one control, that the process is resilient, right? The other good thing, though, about humans is that they're great at pattern recognition and anomaly detection. And so it's really important, like we talk about when processes fail, that we have alert signals that go out that says, hey, these processes failed, we're under attack, whatever. Like those should be people as well, not just the technology, but the people should also have a very low friction way of getting in contact with you and saying, hey, something's up. And that goes both from the inside and from the outside, like making sure that you have a low friction way for folks to contact you from outside the company if they see something wrong.
Right on. Okay. So I have a local meetup here called CSEC East, and we had April Marduk, who's the CISO of Seattle Public Schools. And she doesn't have the nice environment that a lot of us folks have. I mean, cyber resiliency for her would just be to remove all of, because she has external actors being hostile, but she also has 45,000, school age kids that are trying to figure out a ways around their controls. So she has an internal and externally hostile environment that she has to deal with on a regular basis. So I'm sitting here, reading through this and doing some research, and I was like, I don't know if she can actually achieve cyber resiliency using people. A lot of hers is going to be technology based. It's going to be controls that are going to be, trying to protect the people who are trying to get around those things. But in a normal work environment, normal being, where we have adults who, are working, I could definitely see using them. Masha talked about that as well. People can also be good indicators of compromise as well when they click on something and they realize they've done wrong.
But I just want to point out that she has 45,000 person internal red team. I mean, that's got to be worth something.
That's fair. I stopped short of asking her why doesn't she deputize some of these kids to help them get around security, but there's some legal obligations about child labor laws or something like that. Yeah. Little piddly, child labor laws or whatever. I want to talk about quick wins before we go. We're coming up here on 3/4 of an hour, but so they're quick wins. So if I'm in an environment and I'm trying to increase cyber resilience, what are some of the things that I can do to increase that?
Yeah. So first step, I think, is really identifying what you want to get out of cyber resilience. It goes back to the same conversation as zero trust, right? Anything you're trying to do, you got to figure out what your objectives are. What are your goals? What are you trying to get out of it? What are the benefits? And then socialize the heck out of those benefits, right? Like communicate early and often to your stakeholders, to your constituents, to your leadership, to the executives, and to the board. Like, this is what we want to do, and this is why we want to do it. And create that relatability and that resonance, and show that there's value in it, right? Mm-hmm. And then the next step, I think, is just creating a roadmap, like split it up into chunks, because if it's too big of a project, then everybody's going to look at it and say, how do we get from here to there, right? So those quick wins really are going to be the low-hanging fruit, the table stakes that you've identified as part of your overall roadmap, like surface them to the very, very top of the list, and tell your executive team, like, these are the things we need to invest in first. From a resilience standpoint, maybe the first thing you need to do is get some sort of honeypot so you can at least get some sort of attack signals detection. Or maybe it's nothing to do with technology, and it's you need to train your staff better to be able to respond more quickly and recognize what's going on, right? From a security team standpoint, or maybe even other folks in the company. But it's going to differ from company to company, from organization to organization, what those quick wins are, depending on what's already in place, what the culture of the company is. But it starts with that roadmap, identifying the low-hanging fruit, where it has the most value, the most bang for the buck, and be able to tie implementation to demonstrable value through data, right? So not just some magical thing you put in place, like, okay, we're safer. We just don't know we're safer. Like, it needs to show some evidence that you're safer, right?
Right.
And you need to create some sort of metrics to kind of help tell that story.
Nice. Yeah, you touched a little bit about organization there. I'm thinking communication is key, and depending on the size of the organization depends on how much you can actually get done with regards to cyber resiliency. If you've got 5 people in your company, it's going to be a lot easier. If it's 500, 50,000 people, you're going to have to break that down. It's going to be departmental resiliency. It's going to be divisional, resiliency, and communication is going to be important across the whole environment, regardless. I think.
You're very right, because in my experience, we complain a lot about lack of investment from a budgetary standpoint in security. But my experience, so often the roadblock is organizational inflexibility, sort of that inertia. And that's, you can spend all the money in the world and not change the organization if you try to move too fast, or if you haven't communicated, to your point, what the goals and objectives are and how this is going to benefit those stakeholders. And yeah, absolutely. Communication is a huge key, making sure that people understand what you're trying to do. And again, communicate early and often about the benefits.
Cool. James, we're coming up here on our time. Is there any last thoughts or anything you'd like to add before we go, or any questions that I have failed to ask, or something that I may have missed?
No, I think this has been a great conversation. I'd love to continue it in social media if folks are interested. If they have any questions, happy to answer any. But I just want to say I'm really it's been a privilege being on your show, and really happy to have this conversation. Enjoyed it a lot. I hope you did too. And best wishes to your 2 co-hosts and their time off. Hopefully it's good.
Cool. Yeah. So that brings me up, James. If people did want to reach out and ask questions about, you didn't mention blockchain or machine learning or AI or anything. So I want to give you a quick 30 seconds on what Illumio does, just to, give people an idea of what it is that the company does for Infosec and IT.
Yeah, absolutely. So microsegmentation, which is just a big word to say that we help companies create basically zones of network traffic, controlled network traffic, like you would do with a regular firewall, but you're doing with hosts. So our agent runs on the server, and you issue security policies that manage traffic based on labels and other types of policies that you create. That creates basically virtual zones and segmentation, segmented environment that allows you to, without having to make changes to your actual firewalls, create sort of the same type of thing. And it's much more complicated and more sophisticated than that, but that's sort of the very, very high level. And the great thing about this is that, one thing that you want to do when you're trying to be cyber resilient is to create this compartmentalization, so that if one area is compromised, that you can prevent that attacker from going into other areas. And a lot of times that's very difficult in sort of your traditional firewall models. But when you can do that with the hosts themselves, the workloads, then it opens up a lot of opportunities. I will just say that as I mentioned, I joined Illumio in January, and being back at a security company is super exciting to me, because you get to be an internal customer and you get to play with the product and abuse the product in all sorts of ways that just makes it super exciting as a security practitioner. So yeah, I know I'd be happy to answer any questions about the product and what it does, but that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Cool. Awesome. And for one last thing. So the pandemic has upset a lot of folks. There may be some folks out of work. Are there any security positions or anything open for at Illumio that are advertised or not advertised that we could perhaps reach out or send along to your recruiters?
So not at this time, but please do, ping me if there's interest, because, I'm certainly part of a really fantastic CISO network and security practitioner network. And we're always, as an industry, looking for great talent. And I know that there's something out there for each person who's looking that is great for them and is a great fit. And I'd be more than happy to help make those connections and socialize that.
Awesome. All right. Well, James, thanks for coming on, and maybe we'll have y'all on in the future to be more Illumio focused, because I do like the micro segmentation. Sounds interesting. So maybe we can have y'all on to talk about some product in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully, I'll explain it better next time. But again, super happy to really appreciate the opportunity to come on and have a chat, and really enjoyed it, and I hope everybody else did.
That was our show for this week. You can find show notes for this and all of our shows at www.breakingsecurity.com. You can also find an RSS link on the site to add to your favorite podcatcher. You can find all of us on Twitter. Ms. Berlin can be found at Infosister, INFOSYSTIR. Mr. Betcher can be found at BetcherPwned, BOETTCHERPWNED. And you can follow me on Twitter at Brian Brake, BRYANBRAKE. We have a Slack. Come join us on our Slack. A lot of great things going on there, a lot of channels of various InfoSec-related subjects. You can get an invite on Twitter by emailing our official Twitter handle for the show at Brakesec, BRAKESEC, or you can email us at bds.podcast@gmail.com. Thank you to all of our Patreon supporters for their monetary assistance by offsetting costs involved in putting out a weekly show. Zoom fees, Libsyn hosting, domain purchase, renewal, equipment upgrades, time and effort building the community we have. We appreciate all of your help and support. If you'd like a t-shirt, stickers, coffee mug, or just to show your support for the show, you can check out our TPub site, www.tpublic.com/user/BDS podcast. We thrive on your feedback. A quick 5-star comment on iTunes or Google Play Store or your favorite streaming service, Spotify, Pandora, what have you, go a long way to gaining us additional visibility. It takes no time at all, and we appreciate your help in spreading the word.
All right. That was it for Breaking Down Security this week. Be safe out there. Be kind to one another. Listen to your friends and relatives and neighbors on social media. Try not to be the problem solver. Listen to their problem. Try to do what you can to help out. Donate to a couple of good causes. Also, take time for yourself. Take care of yourself, because you're only you have. And we'll talk to you again soon.